I'm going to begin with the Biden-Blinken peace deal for Gaza. In terms of Hamas's response, it's taken a little while coming. It doesn't surprise me. The reality is, with this plan, this had nothing to do with securing peace in Gaza. It had everything to do and has everything to do with the coming election in the United States, where Joe Biden, quite amazingly, I suppose, at least for me, sitting this side of the Atlantic, is trailing both in terms of the polls, but also in terms of psephologists, because it's actually not a direct election, but because it's by electors in terms of states. He's way out in front when it comes to calculation of swing states and what is needed to become president. So my own take on the so-called Biden plan is most certainly not the same as Socialist Worker. Socialist Worker wrote up this plan on the basis that Hamas fighters were doing so well militarily against the Israeli defense forces. Somehow, there you are, Biden in the White House was looking at the military picture in Gaza and goes, good God, the Israelis are losing. I better get in there with a peace plan to stop the slaughter. It's just not convincing, is it? The reality is that what we're dealing with is something that's completely the opposite. The Israeli armed forces are clearly, obviously, completely dominant. And when it comes to slaughter, it's certainly true that Israel suffered, from its point of view, a blow yesterday. What was it? 8 soldiers killed in an ambush, the biggest loss of life for them on a daily basis, I think since November. But that tells you everything. What happened just before that? The rescue operation, where Israel got back, with American help, it would seem, electronics and all the rest of it, got back its 2 captives. How many Palestinian lives did that operation cost? Let's talk of 100, 200. That's the military reality in Gaza at the present time. It's true that Hamas can hit back occasionally, but the reality is that Israel possesses overwhelming armed force. And what we've had again over the last few days is the figure being released, what the BBC will always tell you, the Hamas health authorities or something along those lines. Their latest figure is that the death toll on the Palestinian time, we're not talking about casualties, we're talking about death, has now topped 37,000. And I have to say myself that I'm quite surprised how few Palestinians have died so far, because I was certainly expecting many, many, many more deaths, not by the bullet, not by the bomb, but by disease, by people not getting adequate food, clean water, medical facilities. I expected myself the death toll to be much higher. And it's worth noting that in the south of the Gaza Strip, the Israeli army has announced a on-off. This day, we bomb you. The next day, we're going to allow free movement of, it will mainly be UN, but aid agencies delivering food and other such supplies. Either way, it's clear that vast numbers of Palestinians are on the edge of starvation and are therefore on the edge of going down, and especially with children, going down with diseases that you and me either wouldn't get, or if we did get, would simply shrug off. When you are denied food, then you become vulnerable to all sorts of, contagions that have the potential to kill not just thousands, but tens of thousands. So I'm not convinced that it's Hamas fighters. I think it's to do with the US elections. And also, just I think it's worthwhile in this context to mention the letter we got in this week's Weekly Worker from a comrade from Brighton that is talking about the conquest of Israel by some axis of resistance, which would include Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, and the Houthis. The idea that such a combination could conquer Israel under any circumstances, quite frankly, just shows a profound ignorance of geostrategic realities and any expectation of geostrategic realities. No, Iran is not just about to launch a conquest on Israel. If anything, what we actually have is the possibility, certainly people in Netanyahu's government, and certainly Netanyahu himself, have been gagging to be given the go-ahead by the United States to bomb the shit out of Iran, which they're quite capable of doing in a way that clearly, as was demonstrated previously with the Israeli attack on the embassy of Iran in Syria, while Iran is capable of launching missiles, how many of them would land in Israel? How many of them would hit a military or civilian target that was worthwhile from their point of view? You just ask the question, you get the answer. But no, from our point of view, we're not in favor of any conquest of Israel. What we're in favor of is a peaceful solution if we can, but our solution actually doesn't rely on reactionary powers. It relies on progressive change, crucially in Egypt, but also in other countries such as Iraq, such as Syria, and potentially Saudi Arabia. We need to sweep away these reactionary regimes, and the project has to be a working class project. And a working class project would, yes, we are convinced, at least have a chance of prizing away big chunks of the Israeli Jewish, the Hebrew population. Indeed, what we must aim for is prizing away a majority of that population from Zionism. And it's in that context that we would talk potentially about a federal solution, not within the little box of Israel, Palestine, which falls down, in our view, in the same way that any one state solution does, and that is who the hell is going to deliver it. And I've already spoken about the situation in Gaza. It's worthwhile mentioning the West Bank, where there are many reports of attacks on a daily basis by settlers. It's also worth mentioning that since October the 7th last year, something like 24,000 housing units have been built by Israel on the West Bank. We often don't take notice of what's going on the West Bank. And it isn't just about violence, it's about continued Israeli colonization. And what I want to say, just to close this particular section, is if we look at the recent resignation of Benny Gantz from the War Cabinet. Remember, there's three individuals in the War Cabinet, and then they have, how should I put it, people in the War Cabinet that play a secondary role, don't have a vote. There's been another resignation on that level. But what that's about isn't the overall project. The overall project that Zionism begins with is an Israeli colony for Israeli people. And the project is to replace all classes in Palestine with Jewish people, Hebrew speakers. Benny Gantz has no difference when it comes to that. The Labour Zionists, who began the whole thing after all, in terms of Israeli independence, have no difference on that. What he's resigning over is the short to medium term prospects in Gaza. And what he's doing is speaking for at least a fraction of the IDF high command. And what they're saying is we don't want to be an occupation force over 2 point whatever it is, 2.4, 2.5 million Palestinians. That will cost Israeli lives if we go for that. What's the point of it? That's what he's resigning over. That's what the plan argument is, and what the Israeli army wants, or should I say, at least what sections of the Israeli army wants, is to go in there, in inverted commas, do the job, and that is smash up Hamas. No one seriously thinks you can finish Hamas, but smash it up sufficiently that it thinks twice, 3 times, 4 times about doing another October the 7th, or smash it up sufficiently that it's simply not capable of doing that, then withdraw. That's what that Benny Gantz is on about. What, on the other hand, we have with Netanyahu, I think, is either in terms of his actual coalition, which remember is different to the War Cabinet. I think what you have there is an implicit or explicit desire to actually expel the population of Gaza from Gaza, or at least the majority of the population. And the plan would seem to be clear to me. I think it's clear to them, and that is push them over the border between Gaza and the Sinai and let the Egyptians take care of them. And if they don't want to go, then let them starve. That's actually what Netanyahu and his coalition have in mind. Now, that, you know, Netanyahu ain't going to say that. The coalition partners basically do. In terms of the United States, clearly that isn't acceptable to Biden. It might not be acceptable to Biden morally, but it's certainly not acceptable to Biden electorally. On the other hand, if you look at Trump, that's another question entirely. And I think with Trump, potentially at least, I mean, I don't know. Certainly, I think that's what Netanyahu thinks. Trump will say, go the whole way, get rid of these people, solve the problem once and for all, and while you're at it, do the West Bank as well. What then happens to the Abraham Accords with Saudi Arabia and all the rest of it, I haven't got a clue. But that, I think, is what Netanyahu is banking on. In other words, from Netanyahu, he was never going to accept the Biden plan. He wants this war to at least go on until November, perhaps to January. And if we look at his own particular individual position, he's clearly got a self-interest in keeping this war going on permanently. Why not? There are loads of permanent wars. And, you know, in terms of Netanyahu, that also has with it the bonus, surely, of leading to some kind of Greater Israel. But again, just to stress the point, a Greater Israel isn't just the plan of Likud, isn't just the plan of the far right in the coalition government. It's in the nature of Zionism itself. And the fundamental problem that Zionism has is simply, if we look at the number of Jews around the world, roughly speaking, we have the same number of Jews in the United States as we do in Israel. And for good reasons, the majority of Jews in the United States had no intention whatsoever of packing up their bags and leaving the United States to take their chances in Israel. And that's true for the majority of Jews elsewhere in the world. So unlike the United States, unlike Australia, there is no endless stream of migrants willing to come. Israel simply hasn't got enough Jews in the world that want to come to Israel to flood the native population. So instead, it has to get rid of them either physically by letting them die or pushing them beyond the borders, as it did, for example, in 1948. Okay, let's move on. I've already mentioned Keir Starmer and the Labour Party and its recognition. At least I think I did. Can't remember now. Anyway, let's start again. I'll mention Keir Starmer, his plan to recognize the Palestinian state. Well, what Palestinian state? What's this all about? I think it's the same, actually, as the Biden plan. This is about our general election, July the 4th. And this is about Labour strategists looking at the Muslim vote, but also looking at the sort of progressive vote and worrying about various seats. So apparently, according to the story, there are 12 seats where Labour is worried about left-wing candidates, independent candidates eating into the Labour vote and making what were safe Labour seats at least questionably safe. So they're sending in teams to work in these constituencies. And of course, the message is going to be, well, it's a choice between the Tories and Labour, and it's Labour that will recognise Palestine, as did Ireland, as with Spain. So we're on the side of Palestine, the Tories aren't. That will be the message. Of course, anybody with a brain will recognise that all Starmer is capable of doing is trailing the United States. It's true that the United States, in the form of Biden, certainly hasn't promised to recognise a Palestinian state. But on the other hand, we have the call for a ceasefire from Biden. We have the peace plan from Biden. And this is for domestic consumption. And just going on to the general election campaign in terms of the main picture, I've tried to look up latest opinion polls, haven't come out with much other than the story. Well, roughly speaking, the gap is between 16 points at the lowest end and 25 points at the top end. So most discussion amongst pundits is really about how big the Labour majority will be and what are the Tories going to be reduced to. And so you get stories of the Tories being reduced to 60 MPs, stuff like that. You even have it from Grant Shapps, you know, that the danger is that Labour is heading towards what he calls a super majority. What the hell a super majority is, I haven't got a clue. You know, I mean, we used to have stuff, didn't we? From, don't anyone remember Quintin Hogg, Lord Hailsham? And he talked about an elected dictatorship. which you can get, I suppose, in a first past the post system. And indeed, as far as I know, I think we've always had a situation of where governments, no matter what huge parliamentary majorities they get, when it comes to the popular votes, I think there was one exception. I think it was 1951, but I could be wrong. So if anyone either knows it or looks it up as I'm speaking, I'll be grateful for that. But I think in 1951, we did actually have the Tories returned with over 50%, but I could be wrong on that one. Either way, that's really the point. That's where the discussion is at. How big the Labour majority is going to be, and how small the Tories are going to be on July the 5th in terms of representation in the House of Commons. Okay, that's led to talk on the one side of the Labour Party being the natural party of government. I think that's far too premature. That was something that Harold Wilson aspired for the Labour Party to become. It's never been the natural party of government. If that title was going to go to any party, clearly it's the Conservative party. We've also got the idea that it's the preferred party of capital. Well, you could make that argument for today, in terms of this particular day of this particular month. We had the, 120 executives line up to sign their approval for the Labour Party. There's also story going around, which we predicted in the Weekly Worker, of Murdoch basically giving the go-ahead for the Sun to give cautious but nonetheless backing for the Labour Party, as it did in 1997. I don't think they'll have the, how should I put it, the nerve on July the 5th to turn around with another headline. It was the Sun what won it, given the Sun's circulation nowadays, and given the lead that the Labour Party has been enjoying way before any possible endorsement, which still might not come after all, from the Murdoch stable. I don't know about the Times, but either way, it certainly won't be the Sun what won it. What about the Labour Party being a bourgeois workers' party under these circumstances? Well, my own view is it remains so. And in spite of Sharon Graham not backing the Labour manifesto this time round, why? Two reasons, as far as I know. One is the question of workers' rights and getting rid of 0-hour contracts. The other one, note, is all about defense industry. And no, it's the oil and gas. Excuse me, the Labour Party's stomped up on the defense industry. It's oil and gas and unite jobs in the North Sea and the oil and gas industry that she doesn't want to support. In spite of that, I would say the Labour Party remains structurally linked to the trade unions. The trade unions are the main generator of bourgeois working class politics. That's what they do. In terms of Sharon Graham, when she negotiates with an employer, she's selling the commodity labor power. That's where her politics lie. And what we have with the Labour Party is that link with the trade unions, and the carrying out of a political program that is, to all intents and purposes, indistinguishable from the Conservative Party. But yes, I think the Labour Party remains a bourgeois workers' party. For me, that doesn't mean that you're obliged to vote for it. I don't know any such principle. that's involved. But I would say in this election, where there's simply, a Labour mainstream Starmerite candidate facing a Tory Lib Dem or whatever sort of candidate, on the basis that you want to be saying, well, the reason I voted Labour, as opposed to not bother to turn up or spoil your ballot paper, is that the Labour Party remains a bourgeois workers' party. I mean, okay, a small point. Nonetheless, I think it is worthwhile making that point. I'm utterly unconvinced, on the other hand, and I'll repeat, I know, that the idea that some comrades have, and this is, I think, more of an excuse, that they will vote Labour on July the 4th because hopes are so high that under Labour government, if hopes are low at the moment, they will rise, and you'll have some sort of crisis of expectations, strikes, demonstrations, and that will lead to the left growing and the left being on some sort of cusp of coming to power. And to me, as I said, that owes everything to excusing auto-labourism or something very close to that, nothing to do with the reality. I don't know it. I'm going to have to look it up. But the classic point of reference when it comes to crisis of expectations is France, 1936, the coming to power of the Popular Front government led by Léon Blum. This was with the support of the Communist Party. This was the Socialist Party, plus the Republican Socialist Party. It wasn't a socialist party, it was a petty bourgeois party, but with external backing from the Communist Party. And what you had is rank and file militants, I would guess overwhelmingly Communist Party rank and file militants, not because of instructions from Moscow or from PCF headquarters in Paris. What they did is they went on strike. They occupied their factories, and they won massive concessions. And the PCF and Léon Blum, the Socialist Party, had to do their damnedest to negotiate a settlement that stopped that spontaneous movement going any further, and to promise that the Popular Front government will actually deliver. Of course, the Popular Front government went into crisis. Léon Blum didn't last long as Prime Minister, and it wasn't that long before France fell, with the bourgeoisie, or at least sections of the bourgeoisie, effectively welcoming the Germans, because this would put pay to the Bolshevik contagion that was running rife in France. All you need to read is your Jean-Paul Sartre on that particular question. So in my own calculation, this is meant to be a joke, by the way, I think the chances of a crisis of expectations in Britain following July the 4th are 0.00000000001%. So it's conceivable, it's technically conceivable, but anybody who actually looks at the objective situation would be crazy to come to any other conclusion other than expectations are basically at a zero level. And all people have an expectation for on July the 5th is, one, there won't be a Conservative government. I think that's reasonably said. That's what their expectation is. They're voting to get rid of the Tory government. The second expectation isn't saying very much, and that is the Labour Party will be more competent. It might not be true, but the hope is, that's about it. The hope will be that the Labour Party will be more competent than the Tories. I think that's possibly true. If you think about David Cameron, remember David Cameron, the guy that went for a referendum and lost it? You shouldn't do that. And to be followed by who? Theresa May and her deal with Brexit and these massive parliamentary defeats, followed by Boris Johnson, God, and then Liz Truss, and then Rishi, you know. So, yeah, perhaps they're right that on July the 5th, we'll not have a Tory government, and the Labour front bench will be more competent than the Tory governments that we've seen. How could you be more incompetent? I ask. I really don't think it's possible to imagine a more incompetent set of scoundrels that we've seen leading the Tory party. Okay, I just wanted also then to bung in to the discussion, not so much how the Tories will be hammered, but what happens after um, July the 4th, because what we've had, I think, is one opinion poll showing Reform UK actually ahead of the Tories. I think it's only one. I could be wrong. Maybe it's others. But that is amazing, isn't it? My own expectation, and I do underline this point, is that, what we should have seen, what I expected to see, was Tory support bleed, or at least being boosted as Reform UK support bleeds into the Tory party. But of course, what we've had is Nigel Farage throwing his hat in the ring. And at least so far, that's changed things. So instead of Reform UK bleeding into the Tory party, if anything, we've seen the opposite. And we've seen Tory support bleed into Reform UK. Now, the psephologists tell us, and I suspect they're right, that that doesn't translate into the Tory party being reduced in the House of Commons to the ones and twos. The nature of things will be that votes are concentrated. Reform UK has to overcome, the first past the post system. So the expectation, at least with those in the know, I haven't got the computer model, but their expectation is maybe Nigel Farage wins. In Clacton, which UKIP, remember, actually briefly held. Maybe there will be some others in Reform UK that win. But no, the more serious discussion, the more interesting discussion for me is precisely who emerges as leader of the Tory party, because there's no way Rishi Sunak will last if the polls are right. He will go, he'll fall on his sword, and then we'll have a leadership contest. Now, that could be interesting because we might see a situation of where Nigel Farage is in Parliament, and we might see a situation. All of this is, what if? I readily recognize it. Speculation. Of course it is. But we might see a situation where Priti Patel, a Suella Braverman, a Rees Mogg, either emerges as leader of the Tory party or emerges as the kingmaker when it comes to who's going to be the leader of the Tory party. After all, there is the story, and he's hawked himself around, hasn't he, of Nigel Farage either becoming leader of the Tory party or a leading figure in the Tory party. And I think it's just worth thinking back about the nature of the Tory party itself, because there are those that say the Tory party is finished. I think that's all nonsense. I think it's equal nonsense of saying the Labour Party was dead, after the defeat of Labour, with the leadership of Michael Foot and the longest suicide note in history. A lot of nonsense was written about the death of the Labour Party. I just don't buy it. It's conceivable the Labour Party could die. It's conceivable it's delaborized with the breaking of the trade union. All of that's possible. But I don't see death of the Labour Party, nor do I see the death of the Tory party. But a merger between Nigel Farage's private company called Reform UK and the Tory party is quite conceivable. And if we think about the name of the Conservative Party, worthwhile spelling it out in full. Its official name is the Conservative and Unionist Party. I used to think that the origin of that name was with the Carsonites in the Six Counties, Northern Ireland, the Unionist Party of Ulster. But no, it actually dates back earlier to a split in the Liberal Party in Scotland. This is the origin of the Conservative and Unionist Party. And indeed, if we look back at the history of the Conservative Party, of course, it's been a history of splits and mergers. And it begins, after all, with a split in the Whigs. And a faction of the Whigs go over to the Tories. And what we have out of that is the Conservative Party that has brought all, into it all sorts of thises and that's. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, I'm just saying this as a throwaway, that we don't end up sometime this year or sometime soon with a new name, the Conservative and Reform Party. How long that name lasts in terms of your ballot paper, that's a different question, but that really wouldn't surprise me. My basic proposition is, in spite of our expectation, my expectation, I would have thought yours as well, that Keir Starmer will get the call from Chas on July the 5th, come to Buckingham Palace. Are you in a position, Sir Keir, to form a government? Yes, Your Majesty, I am. Then go, I don't know what they say. Anyway, you get the general idea. I have heard some comments on the left, at least, I don't know whether they're still saying it, saying that the Conservatives are going to win. I don't take that seriously. But no, I think that's pretty clear. But my basic proposition is that politics in Britain are going to the right. And you might end up with Jeremy Corbyn in Parliament. You might end up with one or two other independents. You might end up with a big might, George Galloway, I do count him on the left, in Rochdale. This time he will be facing a Labour candidate endorsed by the Labour Party. So it's not a shoe-in. Either way, my basic proposition is that politics in Britain are going to the right. This will be the most right-wing Labour government in terms of its manifesto, I think, in history. And the Tory party is not just about to do what was considered the sensible thing, like a lot of idiots on the left would say it as well. You've got to go to the centre. The centre is moving to the right because the right is moving to the right and the left is also moving to the right. I mean, look at what is sensible now on the left, and it's we must have a network. We must have a popular front. We must get an alliance with the Greens. That's right-wing shit, if you excuse my Anglo-Saxon. And to back up my thesis, I don't think that's just confined to Britain. I think that's something you could say about the United States. I think that neoliberalism clearly has run out of steam, and liberal opinion, of course, preaches what do they call it, so-called woke politics. But what it does, it actually impoverishes and depowers millions of people. Of course, that doesn't mean that the Conservatives empower people, but if anyone is offering hope, it's the right. And I'm talking about the far right, not Keir Starmer, but people like Nigel Farage. I will stop mass migration. I will give you a sense of community. I will win Britain back for the Britons. I will make Britain fit for the British people. And you know what he means by that. I will make America great again, Donald Trump. And we get similar politics coming in Poland, Hungary, France, Italy, Spain, across Europe. And where you did have people like, what's his name? Just trying to think of his name. The State We're In. What was the author of that dreadful book? Hutton. Thank you. Hutton. Preaching this idea that Anglo-Saxon capitalism, i.e. neoliberalism, was brutal and savage, but Europe represents this lovely third way, this cuddly middle between the extremes of socialism and well, look at the latest round of European parliamentary elections to see which way the wind is blowing. Now, of course, in real terms, these European elections are symbolic. The European Parliament doesn't have real power. It has some powers, but it isn't the decisive force. The decisive force still is the states, the individual nation state or multinational state, call it whatever you will, you know what I'm talking about. That is clearly the situation. But in terms of judging political direction, these elections are clearly significant. So yeah, it might be that we end up with a new set of commissioners in Brussels, Strasbourg. That's a minor issue. More to the point is what's going on in the nation states themselves, and certainly what these elections show, if you needed to be shown it, and that is the chances of an ever closer union in the EU. The chances of that are zilch. That's dead. That was certainly killed off by the United States and the Ukraine war, making Germany and France pay the price for that war. But it's also being killed off by the shift to the right in Europe, to the politics of narrow nationalism, xenophobia, that have won support across the board, but not least in the working class. And indeed, if you look across Europe, you can make a case that class politics exists in a residual sense in terms of working class people abstaining or whatever it is. But no, what we've seen is a shift from any sort of class politics to another sort of politics. That doesn't mean that class is in irrelevance or economic exploitation doesn't take place, or the capitalist class is in irrelevance. And no, all of that matters. All of that generates politics. But what we've got is radically false consciousness in the working class. You could say that official communism and social democracy were false consciousness, but the Brothers of Italy, Alternative for Germany, National Rally, this is radically false class consciousness, as is Trumpism and the appeal to white working class people in America of Donald Trump and the Republican Party. Okay, so what have been the results? France, 31% for National Rally, Germany, 16% for Alternative, 29% for the Brotherhood or the Brothers of Italy. Remember, this is with the Prime Minister actually being for that. That was the lead party. Similar picture in the Netherlands, similar picture in Poland, in Austria, the Freedom Party, 29%, the leading party in the European elections. And of course, in France, what we have is Macron maybe going for a clever move. Who knows? Maybe he isn't just thinking about what's going to happen in these assembly elections, but in the next after the next. Maybe he thinks that long term. I don't know. Presidential elections, he has to step down after he finishes this term, 2 terms, and you're out. But just like in the United States, you can run for a 3rd time. I think that's either law or convention. I'm not sure. Someone will tell me. I think it's the law. Either way, maybe he's thinking, okay, I lose this assembly election. I have to have Marine Le Pen's number 2 as my prime minister. I will cohabit with that prime minister, and maybe I'll try to discredit National Rally in the meantime, ready for my successor in the next presidential election. He hopes that it won't be Marine Le Pen, but in order to run, just like Putin did the time after that. I don't know. Either way, the chances are that not only could you have, quite realistically, a National Rally prime minister in a very short time, isn't it? After 2 rounds of assembly elections, you could conceivably have Marine Le Pen replacing Macron as president in the next presidential elections. So I think that's the line of travel in Europe. And the problem is with the left is it's too willing to vote for the lesser of 2 evils. And if you vote for the lesser of 2 evils, it's perfectly understandable why. Who would you prefer, Biden or Trump? I don't think they just put an equal sign between these 2 figures. Who would you prefer, Marine Le Pen or Macron? Well, I know who, I mean, didn't Trotsky say, well, what would you prefer to be, poisoned, by some, what do they call it? I'm trying to think, what's the poison? Anyway, rat poison that slowly kills you, or an axe that cleaves your head in 2. Well, you go for the poison, don't you? Because you've got enough time to do something about it. But I don't think that's what life is. I think what the left needs to do is construct an alternative. And that isn't by seeking allies on the right, not the Greens, not the Labourites, not the so-called socialist or social democrats in Europe. What you need is a communist party that's a viable vehicle for an entirely different society, a communist party that has a communist strategy, which would at least say our decisive takeoff point is Europe. We are not going to pursue a national road to socialism. That's illusory. That's suicidal. No, we need an internationalist road. Last point on this. Socialist Worker describes some of these parties that I've spoken about as far right. Others it describes as fascist. I think that all the parties I've spoken about so far I would describe as far right. I think designating them fascist is a big mistake. It entirely gets wrong what fascism was. If we leave it in terms of origins, there's a point to be made. So if we look at the origins of these parties, many of them, have their roots, not least Meloni's party in Italy. Of course, the origins is with the MSI, and back before that, Mussolini. You could say the same about National Rally. This is a party rooted in Vichy France, Action Français, the blue shirts, etc., etc., etc. But that would be the equivalent of looking at the CPB today, the Communist Party of Britain, the Morning Stars Party, and saying that this is a communist party. The idea is risible. This isn't a communist party. It wouldn't possibly be allowed to affiliate, for example, to the Third International. The Third International would look at it and just tell it to, well, F off. You're not communists. You're not even centrists. You're not even pretending to be communist. Well, you've got the word. That's true. Now, what we're actually dealing with the CPB isn't anything fundamentally different from George Galloway's party. It too believes in non-racist immigration controls. It believes in a national road. It wants to defend Britain's industries. No, it's not a communist party. Look at Italy. You know, it is the Democrat Party because it has its origins both in Christian democracy and official communism. Is that a communist party? Is that the equivalent of Bordiga's Communist Party? We'll leave aside his leftism. Of course not. The idea is nonsense. So we need to distinguish between origins. And if one wanted to point out to electors and in your propaganda or agitation the origins of such parties, I think that's perfectly valid. But this isn't the equivalent of Mussolini or Hitler, who came into power backed by the bourgeoisie in order to smash the organized working class. The organized working class, as I've said, in France, which posed a challenge to the bourgeois system in 1936, right? That carried out the program that was in their heads of the Popular Front government, you know, in occupations and strikes that involved more than 1 million people, 1.5 million people, that panicked the bourgeoisie to such an extent that, as I said, when the Nazis came in the form of the German army, they welcomed Hitler into France. We're not in that situation today. We shouldn't expect the smashing of the revolutionary working class because of the reasons I've just said. The working class at the moment is declassed. It's dispersed. It still has trade union power to a minor degree, but clearly not to the degree of where it could cripple a country, or where big concessions would have to be given to it. After all, look at Keir Starmer, look at Sharon Graham complaining about the lack of concessions from Keir Starmer. Is she just about to organise a general strike and the occupation of factories? Are other sections of the working class just about to join her? No, at the very most, what we'll get is what we saw under the Tory party, and that is, in essence, protest strikes. One day here, another day there. You know, just like the junior doctors will be doing in the run-up to the general election. Not something that panics the state or panics the employers, basically to buy off the working class. That's simply not dealing with the world that we're living in at the moment, unfortunately. So I think it's wrong to talk about these parties in terms of fascism. I think it's worth our while sticking to our definition, the classic description of fascism given by Trotsky. Some of his best writings were on the rise of fascism in Germany, but also he dealt very well with the situation in France and Spain. You know, why Franco, for example, wasn't a fascist, but was a right-wing authoritarian army figure. Either way, I think we shouldn't describe what's post-fascist, ex-fascist as fascist. I think we need to stick to a scientific definition of fascism. Okay, what's the time? 4 more minutes. I'll be very quick. 2 things. South Africa, the big business, Financial Times, got the result they wanted in terms of a new government. Basically an alliance between the ANC and the DA, Democratic Alliance, okay, the Inkatha Freedom Party as well. But this is a business alliance. It's what the Financial Times was calling for, as opposed to a populist alliance, and that would be the ANC aligning itself with the new MK party of Zuma and Malima's, what do they call themselves? Economic freedom fighters. That would have been bad news for big business. South African Communist Party General Secretary, just before the government was announced, said ANC should have a minority government. I don't know if there will be SACP ministers in this new government. Either way, what I would say is that the so-called strategy of the SACP for the democratic revolution has been utterly discredited, if it needed to be further discredited. This was meant to be the post-apartheid deal, was meant to be the shortest route to socialism in South Africa. Well, God help us if an alliance with the DA, which is the former party of Helen Suzman, remember her, but also the National Party, de Klerk got in there in some way, a white apartheid party. Either way, this is the party of big business, monopoly capital. It's the party of the preferred party of the capitalist class. What happened, of course, in 1994 wasn't the overthrow of apartheid. It wasn't then leading to some uninterrupted revolution. What we saw is not the shortest road to socialism. What we saw is a route to shoring up capitalism. That's what this ANC government is all about. Capitalism in South Africa has been doing very badly over the last decade or so. And the hope of big business is that by putting in responsible ministers from the DA, maybe capital accumulation can be improved. That's the hope. What the hell happens to the SACP? Maybe it is forced because it gets expelled by the ANC. Who knows? Maybe it breaks. I don't know. Either way, a strategic failure. But this really wasn't about strategy. This was about an excuse to do a deal with international imperialism post the collapse of the Soviet Union, a deal really brokered by the United States. That's what the first democratic elections in South Africa were about. And I'll finish with this one. Peace deal being negotiated in Switzerland with Ukraine and 90 other countries, minus Russia, China, India, and Brazil. This has got nothing to do with peace. It's got nothing to do with anything in reality. Putin's, well, we'll go for peace if you give us the four, the four provinces plus Crimea. That's got nothing to do with peace either. What we're dealing in Ukraine is a situation, in my humble opinion, that Russia is not just about to collapse. Russia cannot take Kiev. It cannot overcome Ukrainian resistance. It might potentially have done so in the opening phase of the war, if they had been better prepared, if they put more force into it. That's a speculation worth indulging in, but that's long gone. It didn't happen. And what we now have is a situation where Russia is dug in deep, and whatever the United States says about Ukraine being allowed to use longer range missiles against Russia itself, that will not affect the outcome, nor will the delivery of F-16 fighters or Bradley fighting vehicles or Leopard 2 tanks. None of that will prove decisive. What we're engaged with here is a war of attrition, and that might change in terms of the United States and Trump in November/January. I'm not convinced of that. I'm not convinced of his 24 hours, but we wait and see. Leaving that one aside, I think if you were a strategist in the United States, you wouldn't be displeased about what's going on in Ukraine at the moment. You've been able to pump up war feeling in Europe. You're able to pump up so-called defense spending, i.e. arms spending throughout your allies. And who do they buy their arms from? Well, of course, there is Germany. There's a little bit of France, a little bit of Britain, a little bit of Sweden, but the bulk of NATO armaments, the bulk of what Ukraine is using, the bulk of what it will use with this latest 50 billion tranche of former, interest from Russian money that's been seized. This will go to the coffers of so-called defense, the so-called defense industry in the United States. And from their point of view, things look sunny, things look positive, things have never been better. But other than that, I think this war shows all the signs of going on and on and on. There won't be a breakthrough by Russia in their non-summer offensive. There won't be a Ukrainian breakthrough in spite of the delivery of new missiles, new planes, new tanks. This war will go on and on. And if anything, it's not World War One, but that's the best model to look at to see what sort of war we're fighting. It's who can take the most casualties, who can produce the most shells, who can economically and politically take the cost of this war. But I don't think that this war is going to be won on the battlefield. It's going to be won elsewhere.